I'm going to speak today. What I'm also happy about is I don't have to present what the convention is, and because you're all alumni, so you know the convention very well, and I'm not going to say what is this convention that UNESCO has drafted this year. The title in the paper is about implementation of the convention, but actually I'm going to speak a little bit more specifically about a program we are running in UNESCO for capacity building. And in fact, it's very interesting because the program is a little bit parallel but complementary, I believe, to the really interesting work that's being done here in this context. But just to give you an idea, at this stage we are, can you see that? Yeah. 143 countries, state parties to the convention as of April, and 27 from Asia and the Pacific. So again, in terms, as I've said in the past, in terms of how fast international treaties get ratified and spread, this has gone extremely fast. They often take a long time. So we see that there's a broad, if you will, political support for the concept of intangible heritage and an enthusiasm from countries to come on board. And you can see it's quite dispersed geographically across the world. Latin America, Africa, and Asia, Asia Pacific have high ratification amount, a percentage, if we will. And as you know, the convention works with lists to a large degree, but there are 3 different lists. Now, this is one of the things we'll see a huge imbalance, and we have seen a massive imbalance in the way the convention has been applied. So there is the intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding list, the so-called representative list, and then the register of best practices. There was a lot of debate when the convention was being elaborated among experts about, first of all, whether there even should be lists or not. And then when there should be lists, what were the different aims of the different lists? And there was a big push to have this idea of urgent safeguarding needs, that certain intangible cultural heritage was seriously endangered today and priority should be given in safeguarding that kind of intangible heritage. And then there was a debate, well, there's some intangible heritage that needs recognition, awareness raising. And that became the representative list. And then finally, because there is an idea, and as we were mentioning yesterday over dinner, you know, tangible heritage has a body of academic and theoretic practice and discipline and theory going back 100, 200 years. In fact, some say since, I think, Louis XIV started creating national parks in France. But intangible heritage, apart from, say, in East Asia and Japan and Korea, really there hasn't been much academic, or as a concept it hasn't been studied and developed in nearly to the same degree. So it was thought that a list to encourage best safeguarding practice should be established. So we can see here, what can we see? We can see here clearly the representative list is by far the list that countries, that member states are trying to present themselves on. And this has caused some concern. The concern, to be perfectly frank, is that it's the glory list. It's the list of sort of glorious intangible heritage, and the more complex work of safeguarding and best practices and how to safeguarding is kind of being ignored. And so this is a concern that has been expressed by some experts and some practitioners and through UNESCO. Nevertheless, on another sense, it's a success that there's so many elements getting inscribed, getting recognized, but there's a tension within the convention. We can see a clear imbalance here between the priorities of the member states in submitting the lists. So if we look at Asia Pacific, not only, as you know, the convention has domains, and we can see that for Asia and the Pacific, by far, performing arts has been the principal domain. But oral traditions and craftsmanship have also grown. Is this, one could analyze and speculate about why this is. I won't particularly do so here, but just to note that really performing arts for Asia Pacific. I doubt in other regions of the world the emphasis is on performing arts to that degree. And this shows over the years how these domains in terms of Asia-Pacific have been inscribed. You can see constantly performing arts. I won't go into too much detail, but a growth in some of the others such as social practices, rituals, and festive events. So there's a growing proportion in some of the domains such as knowledge and practices related to nature and the universe and traditional craftsmanships, but again, continued dominance of performing arts. So that's just something to note for this region. So why did UNESCO then decide basically the policy from headquarters globally has been for UNESCO to stop doing direct sort of safeguarding projects and to focus exclusively on so-called capacity building. And capacity building essentially for governments, for the, let's say, policy makers and so on. We'll come to who they are. Why? Because there was a request from the state parties and the Intergovernmental Committee to the Secretariat that they were seeing a lot of misapprehension and miscomprehension about the convention in terms of the applications and the nomination files being sent. There's also a fund to the convention that's not being accessed because countries are not formulating their requests in a way that demonstrates their understanding of the principles of the convention and what's it about. So the money's sitting there for safeguarding and it's not getting used. So these issues were being raised. So not understanding the different mechanisms, and as I said, in many countries it's a new field of heritage practice, and many countries lack human, or let's even say institutional resources or technical know-how. So they may, in many countries we see, you know, the archaeologists who are used to doing archaeological conservation writing up intangible heritage safeguarding plans, where clearly they're not necessarily the best equipped to do so, and they're just translating from tangible heritage to intangible heritage. This is a lack of human resources. The Ministry of Culture's departments of conservation don't have the people with the required skills or backgrounds in there, and it will take some time to build that up within countries, within many countries. And so, of course, the aim is to enhance capacity in beneficiary countries, to safeguard, and to benefit from the convention, so to give life to the convention in the way it should be. And we don't know. I think the verdict's still out on that, and it'll take a decade or two to see where that really goes. So we've started a regional program funded mainly by Korea, Japan, and Norway, funds in trust to UNESCO. For the moment, from our office in Bangkok, we are running for 9 beneficiary countries in Asia Pacific, but mainly for language regions related to Russian. The Central Asian countries are being run from our Almaty office. So the countries we're starting with are Bhutan, Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Mongolia, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Sri Lanka, and Timor-Leste. We hope next year to expand to Myanmar and Pakistan. And then, of course, 4 of the Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. So what did we do? Headquarters helped develop curricula, which are really modules, because as was mentioned this morning, it's impossible, even on a national level, to define exactly what needs to be done at each locale, but let alone on a global level where you're dealing with different continents and different things. So the idea is to give a skeleton shell of how these training programs are, and then train trainers that we did. So UNESCO did globally a series of trainings here in the Asia-Pacific region in Beijing, where, as we know, in fact, there are 3 UNESCO Category 2 centers for intangible heritage recently created, the one in Japan, where we heard about this morning, one in Korea, and one in China. So this was held in the one in China. And then for the different parts of the world, Harare, Libreville, Sofia, Havana, Abu Dhabi. So there the idea was to engage, work with a group of experienced trainers, anthropologists, or people engaging with ICH so that they could become the UNESCO trainers going out. And we're happy to say Ajahn Parita is one of those trainers we trained, and she has been working in some of the countries. So there's at this stage, 4 workshops we've developed. The first one is ratification of the convention, and I'll explain what that is, but that's a workshop for countries interested in ratifying the convention, so presenting what it implies, what they need to do, how it affects them. The second is a general implementation of the convention at the national level. Then the third and fourth are more specific on specific issues we noticed, and that came out through the Intergovernmental Committee, which needed to be addressed. And one of them, which is very relevant here, community-based ACH inventory. We have seen clearly that the idea of, as the convention stipulates very clearly, that communities are, if you will, at the forefront of inventorying and safeguarding practice as the experts, so to speak. This is a very difficult concept to put into actual government practice. And it's not something most governments are used to. It's something in general, it's not easy. And in fairness to governments, it's not easy to do. It's easy to theorize about. And it's easy to, if you will, say this is what should be done. How do you do it is a much more difficult thing. How do you do it with the constraints of budgets and with the... And there is an attitude in many places of, well, communities don't know, we need to tell them. And that has been how things are doing. So these, and then finally the other one, in order to address the imbalance that we talked about earlier, is we really want to try to focus on the urgent safeguarding list, which should be an important list, and which unfortunately, well, as you know, many of you will know the World Heritage List. The World Heritage List has carrots and sticks, and one of the sticks is the endangered list in World Heritage, that if a World Heritage site is not being managed properly, the committee can put it on the endangered list. And this is a threat. And, you know, the member states don't like this because this is saying you are not taking care of your heritage site properly. So there's some confusion that this urgent safeguarding list is somehow akin or close to this endangered list for the World Heritage List, but it's not at all the case. In fact, it's completely separate. And there is no need for an element to be on the representative list for it to go to the urgent safeguarding list. It's a completely separate mechanism. So it's not a punishing thing. It's put forward by the country. It's not to say this needs urgent safeguarding. Whether or not it's on the representative list is irrelevant. So I'll just try to run through quickly how these workshops go. Tell me if I'm running out of time. Maybe give me a 10 or 5 minute marker. The two-day workshop is to clarify why the convention needs to be ratified, what the advantages are, what the processes are, and looking at the various issues. Different countries have different processes for ratification. Some is quite simple. We heard today Thailand is in the process of ratifying. It's much more complicated in Thailand. It has to go through several parliamentary committees and things. It's taken quite a while. But also what we try to focus on is ratifying the convention also implies policy and legal work to be done in the country. That it's not just a question of ratifying, that the laws need to be reviewed and the policies, particularly in terms of safeguarding ICH. Does the country have policies that is actually undermining ICH? Sometimes education or other cultural policies may be undermining ICH in some communities and so on. So it gives a brief overview of that. Then the 5-day workshop on the implementation at the national level says how, you know, the idea is to train how this convention works at the national level, because ultimately it's always at the national and then at the community or regional level that this convention takes effect. The international level is very skeletal. It's very kind of just general concepts. What are the obligations of the states parties? What are the key safeguarding concepts? This is some of the things you've all looked at over your field schools. What do we mean by safeguarding? How is it different? We heard about the problems with the terms preservation and protection, which, because again, these are terms borrowed from tangible heritage, but have very different emphasis in intangible heritage. How do we translate that? How do we involve communities, and what are the mechanisms also for international cooperation? We know, and this is going to be more and more an issue, and it already is, that intangible heritage by its very nature tends to cross national boundaries, tends to be at border communities, but also shared among different countries in various forms. This creates issues, political issues, very frankly, and other issues to do that I think the Intangible Heritage Convention will face. With the World Heritage Convention, there are areas where there are border disputes and things where sites are at the borders, but for intangible heritage, it becomes even more an issue. And so then the participants can share their experiences and reflect on implementation on the intangible heritage. I'm trying to go quickly through this. Community-based ICH inventorying details the essential features of inventorying, and particularly with the real emphasis on how do you have participation of the communities and the ICH practitioners, and why inventorying should be seen as one step in the safeguarding process and not an end unto itself. And that's another thing that we find is countries, well, people when they still countries, departments, ministries, when they start doing that, there's such a big job of inventorying that the inventorying becomes almost an end to itself as a safeguarding practice, and that again is not in the spirit of the convention. Inventorying is meant to be a tool towards safeguarding, but not an end result. So there's all sorts of technical training and so on, and this is the longest one. So this is where the biggest focus has been. This is 8 days of training with a group. And then finally, the preparing nominations to the urgent safeguarding list. So we use simulated nominations and how to do this. This is to help countries who may perhaps being frustrated of not being able to do it. And experience in developing safeguarding plans. It is true that the way the convention is done, the operational guidelines I believe, need to be reviewed, because it's easier to get on the representational list than the urgent safeguarding list, because the urgent safeguarding list requires you to submit a safeguarding plan. It requires more thought. It's more difficult to get through, so that may be not encouraging countries to engage with that. Some people are saying it's too easy to get on the representative lists, but others are saying, well, if you make it harder, actually the ICH practitioners are not experts at submitting UN nomination files, and so are you alienating them from accessing it? So all of these questions are being debated. And again, the urgent safeguarding list, and I think this is what's interesting about the kind of training being done here and how this will fit in, emphasizes community participation for safeguarding, and also principles of free, prior, and informed consent, and so on. So the workshops, as I said, are modular, and the way we do it is we get 2 of our trainers to prepare the content for that specific country and that specific place based on this modular approach, and to take examples that are relevant. So the trainers can't just go there and deliver the workshop as it is. It has to be prepared each time tailored to that country. And so there are lessons plan, handouts, reference materials. It can be done with PowerPoint, online, or it can be done with simple photocopy, paper, low-tech, because again, different countries have a very different capacity in terms of accessing technologies. And the idea is that they will be constantly updated, revised, reviewed. And so what we are hoping at the end of this year is to have our first session with some of the trainers to review, okay, what works, what doesn't work, how are we going to keep. We will need to build up our corps of trainers. And again, I see this as a long-term process, and I think this is really now the convention coming into life, where there's acknowledgement that with all the political goodwill and enthusiasm, the kind of technical difficulties of implementing and safeguarding are now coming to the shore, and that has to be built up. And as I think I said earlier, unlike the World Heritage Convention, which came about at a time when there was already a very worldwide established body of practice, it's nevertheless reviewing, and the World Heritage Convention is still reviewing its guidelines. And the concepts had to be reviewed. The NARA document on authenticity, which I think we've all seen here, very important. And that was also a step to the elaboration of the intangible heritage. But so all of these concepts are being reviewed, and so I see it as part of a normal process. It's aimed at policy-oriented audience, on the ministry and local officials, experts and NGOs, but particularly I think we are aiming at awareness raising of what the conventions are among key people in government. And I think because we're seeing that the decision-making on engaging with the convention goes through government, on whether it's on how to do the inventories. So for UNESCO, we see this is where we need to give that training so that decision-making is in line with what the principles of the convention are. And that doesn't mean it should happen instead of other trainings. There's lots of trainings that needs to happen at lots of levels. But where we are working at is there. I think I've said some of the pedagogical approaches. So we had pedagogical experts in developing the materials, how to do interactive and active learning, and so on. So we've been organizing, we've foreseen over the next 2 years 27 workshops around the Asia Pacific, and we've already organized 9. You can imagine it's a bit of a logistical nightmare trying to get all of this and the trainers in the different places. So we are coordinating from Bangkok the trainers, but the officers, our field officers, are coordinating local logistics. So this is what we're starting. This is what we're working on now. This is what we hope to come back and learn from and see whether this has impact. I think we are doing the right thing instead of trying ourselves, UNESCO, to support this safeguarding project or that safeguarding project. We need to build up the capacity at the national level to themselves make those direct safeguarding activities work. We are seeing that the empowerment of communities and practitioners entering ICH is a relatively new idea, I said, so that's a concept we're still difficult to get countries to enact. The need for and we even get them difficult to invite community practitioners into the trainings. We were hoping to have them participate more in the trainings with the government officials. In some countries that's very difficult. Other issues we've encountered, language of course. We know that the concept of intangible cultural heritage is difficult. Just the word intangible cultural heritage doesn't necessarily translate, let alone all the concepts such as safeguarding, community-based or participatory this or that. All of these things are difficult to translate into languages. So we need to give time to the participants to reflect how these concepts can be enacted and translated without distorting the kind of spirit of the convention. All of this is taking time and it's not so easy. And we rely a lot on our trainers on doing that and giving us feedback. There's a confusion between the conventions, particularly either between the World Heritage and also the 2005 convention. I don't know if you've heard about the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. A convention that is, we call mislabeled the Cultural Diversity Convention. It shouldn't be called the Cultural Diversity Convention. It's a convention to do with the cultural industries. There is a declaration on cultural diversity from 2001, but the 2005 convention is much more about cultural industries and practitioners. So in some countries there's a lot of confusion between these different conventions within the ministries. There's an exaggerated focus on listing. And this is clearly what we saw from the beginning, that countries see the convention about the list and only the list. And we are trying to get them to see that there are policy implications, legal implications. It's about general safeguarding and approaching and valuing intangible heritage, not just about getting on the UNESCO list. But, you know, it's going to be hard for us to ever get away from that focus, and that will remain. So there are mechanisms being discussed in the committee. And again, difficulties in getting the government level to engage with the community in the processes of safeguarding. So thank you.